Hey everybody, I hope you're doing fantastic. It's Carpo here. Sometime mid-February 2014. And I wanted to, just to talk about capitalism for a minute. And I don't like talking politics and I don't like talking money. But I find it a fascinating subject. And I actually have been listening to this lecture for a while now. And it's entitled Thinking About Capitalism. And it's I think 18 hours long, and it's a very interesting look into the history of money and the history of loaning. And I think everybody owes it to themselves to do a little bit of research on the history of taxation, the history of money and exchange, and the history of government, because there are a lot of people out there complaining about the way the government's operating, about the way our money's spent. There are a lot of people even going to the extent to say we should never have to pay any taxes whatsoever. Even some of the most critical thinkers in history have all come to the conclusion that some tax has to be assessed to the people in order to protect the people and in order to ensure that the people have what they need. The unfortunate problem with today's society is that the taxes aren't going to help people the way that they need it. Some of it is, but unfortunately a lot of it's being used to pay off loans to the Federal Reserve, which the U.S. government borrows money from a private company in order to go to war. And this has been going on for quite some time. But it's nothing new. The governments of ancient Greece, Rome borrowed money from various other private institutions and organizations in order to go to war. And the people were rightfully taxed accordingly. When you become an imperialist nation, no longer is it justified to tax the people heavily in order to protect yourself, because you become a superpower like the U.S. has, and we know that we are not protecting ourselves but dominating others. But there's a deeper thought to that goes to the point where, yes, we are invading other countries, but it is to protect the people, not in the sense of protect us from violence or from harm, but protecting us from running out of supplies, because we have overextended our usage of the natural resources in this country. Now, many other countries have done the same, but I'm speaking for the one that I live in, because I can, and I know it. And our government has expended resources to go to wars that we don't even need to fight, that we don't understand, but there's always a deeper meaning behind it. A government doesn't just go to war to go to war. They think they know something that we don't, and perhaps they do. But the point being, in this case, let's say Iraq, it was for oil, and people could argue and say it was not for oil at all, that it was to protect the people. The argument, it doesn't stand up, and it doesn't matter. The point being that now we have the oil, and we have those resources. And returning them to the people was never really the plan. But these private companies that keep America afloat, this is the reason why we go to war. Now, back to taxes. There are a lot of people out there complaining about taxes, saying I shouldn't have to pay any taxes. I've had discussions with people I greatly admire, and people I enjoy talking with on YouTube, who say that they believe that taxation should be an optional thing for the people. I have to find that preposterous. I love the notion of it, but the reality of it is that without forced taxation, people are always going to try to find a way out of it, because people have an excuse for everything. We have an excuse why I shouldn't be taxed this much because I only make this, or this person should be taxed more because they're making this. But then when they're making that much money, they say, oh, I shouldn't be taxed this much. I was just thinking wrong. And it goes back and forth, and there's arguments back and forth about it. But let me start off by saying I am not an anti-Semite. I respect Jews very much. And I have to say that as a disclaimer before I tackle this. And this is why I wanted to make this video. It was a very fascinating angle to this whole idea of government and borrowed money. The idea of usury, which is U-S-U-R-Y, usury is basically loaning money out at an exorbitant return rate. This is every credit card company that exists is committing usury. Most loaning companies or groups or any paycheck loan place, they're all committing usury. They are charging you money on money, okay? And this is nothing new either. This happened back in ancient times as well. This has been going on since 5000 BC. The Sumerians had usury. They had their own taxation. 5000 BC, guys. This is 7,000 years ago. People were taxing their people, going to war, using the percentage rates. Now here's the thing. The usury rates were 10 to 20% for silver. Like if you loaned out silver, the annual return rate was 10 to 20%. If you loaned out grains or cereals, the return was 25 to 35%. Now think about that for a minute. Most credit card companies are, boosting people up to 28%, and that's just a ridiculous interest rate in our eyes, because we're comparing it to other things like 3% or 5% for a house. But that's a very standard rate throughout history. It's a 20 to 30% rate on borrowing things that you don't intend to return for at least a year. These were the annual return rates, and this is totally common. This has been going on since 5000 BC. So the reason why I mentioned the Jews is because in Judaism, excuse me, and this is a big issue with the Jews and the Christians who were living amongst each other. 1,000 years ago, they had these disputes about usury, whether or not a righteous religious person should be able to loan money at a return rate. And in the Bible, it states very clearly, according to what the scholars have said, that I haven't read the parts myself because I've just got into this, but that usury, loaning money out to your own people at a return interest rate, is usury, and that's considered a sin. So the Jews got around this by by writing into Jewish law that usury could be committed against anybody who was not a Jew, okay? To put it simply. So Jews were not allowed to loan money to their own people at an interest rate, but they were allowed to loan money to others at an interest rate. They found a way around this. Their own belief system, because it was cramping their style. It was cramping the business that had changed. For a long period, usury was wrong. And as business increased and people began to need to store more grain, store more stuff, as people began to settle, they needed to set things aside on a reserve. Before there was extra, before there was surplus, money was useless. You ate what you had, you did what you could. And but once people needed to relax and store money away, that became a different story. So there's always going to be somebody that's going to loan money to someone else. The question is, what should the interest rate be? And so I've come to this. I don't know. It's funny because I've been back and forth over the years. I read a book called it's called The Creature from Jekyll Island. And it's like an 900-page book, I think, about the Federal Reserve System. And those are the kind of things that I filled my head with years ago to try to understand how this fiat money system works. So I got a really good grasp of American economy, and I totally understand how all of the money goes. And the whole idea behind it is that most of it doesn't exist. Of course, 99% of the money has no backing whatsoever. But the 1% that does is the actual money that's in play. The rest of it is all figurative numbers. Nobody really has billions of dollars. If you try to take, say you have a checking account with $1 million, go down and try to cash that at your local bank. See how hard it is to get $1 million out of a bank. Sure, you can do it, but it's not as easy as it should be. That's because the actual cash reserves are minimal. All of this money that's in play is a joke. So by reading that book, I'm just saying that I had a really wide grasp on how the economy works, and now I'm starting to get a grasp on how ancient economy worked, so I can make a comparison between the two. So I can be armed with the information needed to discuss rationally whether or not I should be taxed on my income, okay? And this is what I'm getting down to here. And the root of this whole video is to say that that whole preamble I just spoke was basically to explain myself when I say that taxation is necessary. The problem being, how are we maintaining those taxes and utilizing them? It can drive a person insane. But the idea is, let's say that tomorrow the government came out and said, okay, nobody's required to pay taxes anymore. And a lot of people would say, oh no, a lot of people would say, right on. Over a period of 20 years, the infrastructure would crumble to the point where nobody would be able to organize anything. Sometimes it takes a larger entity. We've started ourselves on a downhill because we have so many things to maintain now. And most of these are maintained by fossil fuels. We're talking about everything from roads to cars, factories, airplanes, fuel, down to fossil fuel fertilizers for growing all of our food. Everything has to be maintained. We even have to keep the bee colonies alive in America, or they'll die if we don't supplement their food. We drive these colonies around to pollinate our crops. In Japan, they hand pollinate their fruits and their trees. The world is in serious turmoil right now, and people are so worried about the economy, but the economy is not the problem. The economy has always been the problem, but it's nothing new, is what I'm saying. And this whole idea, before I get off, forget that the whole thing about the Jews, the usury, where they can, loan to their own people, but they can loan to others with interest, but as long as they're not a Jew. That to me is, the reason I brought that up is because I find that to be in the root of my problem with religion. The problem of religion. And it's not the problem of belief. It's not the problem of faith. It's the problem of religion. An organized structure that operates generally through a church. And if you think about it, you see the persecution the Jews have right now for being money grubbers, being this and that. Now think about what I told you about the whole, loaning to other people in ancient times. This has obviously carried connotations all the way over into the present day. Because we had Jews loaning to Christians. Because this is where it came to. The Jews started realizing they could loan to Christians at an interest rate. Because the Christians weren't officially Jews and didn't believe. They were in the same faith realm, but they believed Jesus Christ was the Savior. And that alone allowed Jews to persecute Christians and take their, if a Jew had more money, he could loan it to a Christian at interest. And I'm going to finish this in a part 2, because I got some more to talk about. Peace.